You're safe with me.
The lace at her throat was brittle and cold. It was her mother's, cut and sewn onto a dress that did not fit. A dress meant for a woman, not a girl of 18. Delilah rose, kept her eyes fixed on the cracked wooden floor of the preacher's front room. The air smelled of stale tobacco and boiled cabbage. Outside the wind moaned, a low grieving sound that matched the hollowness in her chest. "And do you, Silas, take this woman?" She heard the man beside her grunt, Mr. Silas Croft. He was a man of 40, perhaps more, with a face like damp dough and small, dark eyes that tallied everything they saw. He owned the town mercantile, the only one for 50 mits. He smelled of whiskey and curing salt. "I do," he said, his voice thick. "And do you, Delilah Rose, take this man?" She felt her stepfather's hand tighten on her arm. Elias Thorne stood behind her, a thin, hard man whose piety barely hid the greed in his gaze. This was his arrangement. He had sold her for the price of his debts to Mr. Croft, a sum settled with a handshake in this ceremony. Silence stretched. The preacher cleared his throat, impatient. "Girl!" Elias hissed, his fingers digging into her skin. Delilah's throat felt packed with dust. She looked up just once at the watery eyes of Mr. Croft. He was not smiling. He was waiting as one waits for a delivery of freight. "I will," she whispered. The words tasted like ash. The preacher mumbled the remaining words. Mr. Croft's hand, damp and heavy, grabbed hers. It was over in less than 5 minutes. Elias clapped Mr. Croft on the shoulder. "A fine day, Croft, a fine match." "She's quiet, mister," Croft noted, his eyes moving over Delilah's thin frame. "That's good." He did not release her hand. He pulled her from the preacher's house and across the muddy street toward the mercantile. Her thin shoes, also her mother's, soaked through with icy mud. Elias Thorne did not follow. He was already headed to the saloon, his payment secure. The rooms above the store were dark. They were filled with the smells of the goods below. Kerosene, dried apples, leather and dust. Mr. Croft pushed Delilah inside and locked the door. The sound of the bolt sliding home was the sound of a coffin lid shutting. "Well, wife," he said, shrugging out of his heavy coat, "the town gave us a proper send-off." He was lying. The town had watched with apathy. She was a stray and he was ammon of property. This was the way of things. Delilah backed away until her shoulders hit the wall. She clutched the thin woolen shawl around her shoulders. It was the only thing left that felt like her own. "Take off the dress," Mr. Croft said. He was not looking at her, but at the whiskey bottle on his dresser. He poured a glass. Her hands would not move. Her breath came in short, sharp bursts. This was not a marriage. This was a purchase. The room felt small, airless. The single window was opaque with frost. He drank the whiskey in one pull and slammed the glass down. "Did you hear me? I paid good money. Your stepfather assured me you were obedient." He turned and the look in his eyes made her stomach clench. He started unbuttoning his waistcoat. "No," she whispered. He laughed. A short barking sound. "No, that ain't your choice, girl. Not anymore." He lunged for her. Panic, cold and absolute, flooded Delilah's body. It was a panic stronger than her fear of Elias, stronger than her hunger, stronger than the cold. As his hands grabbed the lace at her neck, she stopped thinking. She shoved him. She was small, but her terror gave her a sudden wiry strength. She pushed with all her might, driving her palms into his soft belly. Mr. Croft, unbalanced and half-drunk, stumbled backward. He crashed into the small washstand, sending the porcelain basin and pitchers shattering to the floor. Water and ceramic shards sprayed across the boards. He bellowed, a sound of surprise and rage. That was all the time she needed. Delilah scrambled for the door. Her fingers fumbled with the bolt, her nails scraping against the cold iron. She heard him rising behind her, cursing. The bolt slid back. She wrenched the door open and fled. She ran down the narrow, dark staircase, her feet barely touching the steps. She burst into the main store below, a maze of barrels and counters in the moonlight. She heard him on the stairs, shouting her name. She did not bother with the front door. She ran to the back toward the loading dock. She slammed her shoulder against the heavy bar, lifted it, and threw herself out into the night. The cold hit her like a physical blow. She landed in a drift of snow, already ankle-deep. "Get back here, Mr. Croft," roared from the loading dock. "From the street." She heard her stepfather's voice raised in anger. "You worthless girl! You bring her back, Croft." Delilah did not look back. She clutched her shawl and ran. She ran past the sleeping blacksmith shop, past the silent saloon. She ran toward the edge of town, where the last lantern light faded and the vast open plains of Montana began. Snow was falling hard now. It was not a gentle snow. It was a swarm of icy needles, driven by a wind that seemed to blow from the top of the world. Her thin dress was soaked in moments. Her shoes, already ruined by the mud, filled with snow. She kept running. The small cluster of buildings vanished behind her, swallowed by the swirling white. There was nothing now but the wind and the darkness and the crushing cold. Her thin wedding slippers, never meant for this, tore on the frozen ground. The leather bindings snapped. She kicked them off, her feet landing bare in the snow. She cried out a sharp gasp of pain, but she did not stop. The ground was uneven, studded with sharp rock in the frozen stalks of dead grass. She stumbled, fell, and rose again, her hands raw. She did not know where she was going. She only knew she could not go back. After an hour, or perhaps only a few minutes, she could no longer feel her feet. The pain had subsided, replaced by a heavy wooden numbness. She knew it was a bad sign, but the knowledge was distant, unimportant. The need to move, to escape, was the only thing that mattered. Her breathing turned to ragged gasps. The cold burned in her lungs. She pulled the shawl tighter, but it was frozen, stiff, offering no warmth. She began to see things. A light, warm and yellow flickered just ahead, a cabin. She pushed toward it, but it danced away, always just out of reach. She saw her mother standing by a fire, holding out her hands. "Just rest, Delilah." Her mother's voice seemed to whisper on the wind. "It's so warm here." She followed the voice. She stumbled up a low ridge, catching her barefoot on a shard of shale hidden by the snow. She felt a tearing sensation, but the pain was dull. She fell. This time she did not have the strength to get up. The snow was deep here, drifted against a stand of pine. It felt soft. The wind died to low hum. "I'm just so tired," she whispered to the vision of her mother. She curled into a tight ball, pulling the frozen shawl over her head. The world went gray, then black. Wade Coulter liked the snow for one reason. It kept the world away. It muffled sound, erased tracks, and kept the fools in town huddled around their stoves. It left him and the mountains to their own silent company. He was leading his horse, steady through the drifts, a load of freshly cut pine tied to the saddle. He had a cabin hidden miles from the town, tucked into a fold in the foothills where no one ever thought to look. He had built it himself, and it was the only place he had felt anything close to peace since the war. He was checking his trap lines on the way back, his gaze scanning the ground by habit. He saw the anomaly from 20 yards away. It was the color that caught his eye first, a patch of white that did not belong, huddled at the base of a pine ridge. He squinted against the driving snow, a deer, maybe caught in the drift. He left steady and walked closer, his rifle held loosely in one hand. The wind gusted, pulling the snow aside like a curtain. It was not a deer. It was a person. He stopped, his body rigid, a woman. She was wearing a thin white dress now plastered to her body and was half buried in the snow. Wade cursed, the words ripped away by the wind. "Damn it all to hell!" He did not want this. He did not want company, did not want trouble, did not want a body on his conscience. He wanted to turn around, get back to his cabin, and drink his coffee until the storm passed. He moved closer. He knelt, his knees sinking deep. He brushed the snow from her face. She was young, pale as alabaster with blue lips. He put his gloved fingers to her neck. He felt nothing. He pressed harder, searching, a pulse faint, thready, but there. He looked at her feet. They were bare, caked in frozen mud and dark frozen blood. She was clutching a shawl that was as stiff as wood. A memory flashed in his mind. Unwanted and sharp, a burning farmhouse, the smell of smoke, and a woman he had been too late to save. He cursed again, a sound of pure frustration. He could not leave her. He hated that he could not. With a grunt, he slipped his arms beneath her. She weighed almost nothing. He lifted her easily. She did not stir. He carried her to his horse, maneuvering her limp body across the saddle in front of his load of wood. He untied his bedroll and wrapped it around her as best he could, securing her with a length of rope. "Come on, steady," he muttered, grabbing the reins. The journey back was slow. The snow was deepening, and the horse struggled through the drifts. Wade walked ahead, breaking the trail, his head down against the wind. He could feel the cold seeping into the small body slung over his saddle. He walked faster. His cabin was small, built off thick logs. He had cut himself with a low roof and a stone chimney that belched grey smoke. It was a fortress. He got her inside, cut the rope, and laid her on the floor by the hearth. The sudden warmth of the room fogged the air. He stripped off his gloves and coat, his mind working with a grim efficiency. He lit 2 more lanterns. He heated water in the big kettle. The frozen dress was impossible to unbutton. He took his hunting knife and slid it, sleeve to hem, peeling the icy fabric away from her skin. He didn't look at her as a woman. He looked at her as a problem to be solved. He tossed the ruined dress aside and wrapped her in his thickest wool blankets. Then he looked at her feet. They were a mess of blue and purple, cut to ribbons. The blood was frozen. He grit his teeth. He got the warm water in a rag. He spent the next hour cleaning the wounds, his touch surprisingly gentle for such a large man. He found shards of rock and splinters of wood. When he was done, he wrapped her feet in clean rags, smeared with pine pitch salve. He didn't know what to do with her. She couldn't stay on the floor. He looked at his cot, his only piece of furniture besides a table and 2 chairs. With a sigh of resignation, he lifted her and placed her on it, pulling every quilt he owned over her. He found one of his own clean wool shirts worn soft and laid it by the fire to warm. If she woke, she would need it. He sat at the table, pouring himself a cup of scalding coffee. Hess stared at the girl in his bed. She looked like a drowned child. He drank the coffee and waited deeply, profoundly uncomfortable with the woman who had invaded his silence. Delilah woke to warmth. The sensation was so foreign that it terrified her. Her first thought was that she was dead. Her second was that she was back in Mr. Croft's room, that he had caught her, that the cold had just been a terrible dream. She opened her eyes. The light was dim, golden. She smelled wood smoke, coffee, and something else, pine and cured leather. She was under a mountain of quilts. She was in a small, rough-hewn room, a log cabin. She tried to sit up, but a bolt of agony shot through her feet, so sharp it stole her breath. She cried out and fell back. A shadow moved in the corner. A man was sitting at Asmall's table watching her. He was a large man, not heavy like Mr. Croft, but dense with muscle and stillness. He wore a flannel shirt and dark trousers, and he had not shaved in some days. His hair was dark, his face carved with hard lines. Delilah scrambled backward, dragging the quilts with her, until she hit the log wall. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Where am I?" she demanded, her voice a dry rasp. "Who are you?" The man did not get up. He just watched her, his expression unreadable. "You're in my cabin," he said. His voice was deep and rough, like gravel washed in whiskey. "Found you near the pine ridge. You were half frozen." She looked down. She was wearing a man's long undershirt, thick and grey. Her feet were heavily bandaged. You undressed me." A flicker of something. Annoyance maybe crossed his face. "Your dress was frozen solid. Had to cut it off. You can have that." He nodded toward the hearth where a dark blue wool shirt was warming. He stood, and Delilah flinched. He was even taller than she had thought. He picked up a tin cup and ladled something from a pot hanging over the fire. He set it on the table far from his own chair. "There's broth and water. Your feet are cut bad. You run again. You'll lose them or die. Makes no mind to me. But it's a waste of my bandages." He picked up a heavy coat in his rifle. "Don't touch my things," he said. Then he opened the door and disappeared into the grey, swirling snow. Delilah was left alone in the sudden silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the howl of the wind. She stared at the closed door. He hadn't hurt her. He had saved her. But he looked at her with a coldness that was almost as frightening as Mr. Croft's malice. She drank the broth. It was thin but hot, and it burned a trail of life back into her stomach. She looked at the clothes he had left. She waited until she was sure he was truly gone, then swung her legs carefully off the cot. The pain in her feet made her dizzy, but she gritted her teeth. She pulled the warm, heavy wool shirt over her head. It drowned her, the sleeves hanging past her fingers, the hem falling to her knees. He had left a pair of wool trousers. 2. She pulled them on, belting them tight with a length of rope she found, dressed in his clothes. She felt marginally safer. She spent the rest of the day huddled by the fire, watching the door. Wade Coulter did not return until dusk. He had spent the day chopping wood he did not need. The rhythmic strike of the axe, the only thing that could quiet his mind. He hated having her in his cabin. Women meant trouble. They meant noise and feelings and demands. This one was broken. Broken things were dangerous. They reminded him of his own failures. He came in without a word, shaking the snow from his coat. He saw her by the fire, wearing his clothes. She looked like a child playing dress-up. He looked away, his jaw tight. He moved to the far side of the room, checking the load on his rifle, making coffee. The silence in the small room was thick, heavy as wet wool. He ate his own meal, beans and salted pork, standing by the door as if ready to flee. Delilah ate more broth, her eyes tracking his every movement. She was terrified of him. He was deeply uncomfortable with her. When the last of the light faded, he tossed a bedroll onto the floor near the door. "You take the cut," he said. It was not an offer. It was in order. He turned his back to her, pulled off his boots, and lay down in the bedroll, facing the door. Within minutes his breathing was deep and even, though Delilah suspected he was not truly asleep. She lay in the cot, her bandaged feet throbbing. The cabin was warm. She was fed, and she was safe from Mr. Crofted. But she was trapped in a blizzard, with a stranger who looked at her like she was a ghost. She fell into an exhausted, fitful sleep. She dreamed. She was back in the store, the smell of whiskey and damp wool filling her nose. Mr. Croft's face was close to hers, his eyes wet. Then it was her stepfather's face, his hand open, waiting for the silver. He was telling her she was worthless, that she had ruined him. The hand grabbed her arm, the fingers digging in, pulling her down. Delilah woke with a thin, broken sound, half sob, half scream. She was sitting bolt upright. The quilts clutched to her chest, tears streaming down her face. The cabin was dark. The fire burned low to red embers. Across the room, the man was on his feet. She saw his silhouette against the faint light from the window. He had risen in one silent, fluid motion, but he did not move toward the cot. He stood perfectly still, listening to her ragged breathing. She tried to stifle her sobs, ashamed of the noise, afraid of what he would do. WDE heard the crying. Every muscle in his body tensed. He wanted to go to her, to tell her to be quiet. He wanted to shake her. He wanted to comfort her. He did none of those things. Comfort was a lie he did not tell. And he was not a man built for softness. He was the man who caused the tears, not the one who dried them. He grabbed his coat from the peg. He picked up his hunting knife and the wet stone from the shelf. He opened the door and stepped out onto the small porch into the heart of the swirling snowstorm. The wind clawed at him, but he ignored it. Delilah, shivering in the cot, watched the door close. She was alone again. She pulled the quilts over her head, listening to the storm. After a moment, another sound joined the wind. It was a rhythmic, metallic scrape. Outside in the darkness, Wade Coulter stood against the storm, methodically pulling the wet stone across the steel blade. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It was a sound of anger and control, a sound to drown out the memory of a farmhouse burning and the new, terrible sound of a woman crying in his bed. The morning light was a dull grey smear against the single frosted window. The wind had not died. It had grown, shifting from a moan to a high, vicious shriek. The snow was no longer falling. It was moving sideways, a solid wall of white that erased the world. Wade Coulter came in just after dawn, his shoulders and hat thick with snow. He kicked the door shut, and the heavy thud of the bar falling into place sealed the cabin. Delilah, who had been watching him from the cot, flinched at the sound. He ignored her, moving to the hearth. He spent a long time shaking the snow from his coat, his back to her. The tension from the previous night remained. He had not slept in the cabin. She had not slept at all. "Storm settled," he said, his voice rough. "We'll be in here 3, maybe 4 days, maybe longer." Delilah swallowed, clutching the heavy quilt. "What will Wado?" He turned, his gaze finally landing on her. It was cold, impatient. "You'll stay alive? First, you learn the stove. I won't have you freezing or burning us out." He walked to the black cast iron stove that dominated the far wall. He opened the flue, his movements economical. "This is the damper. You keep it open when you start. Close it halfway when the wood catches. You feed it pine to start, oak to hold. You don't ever let it go out." He handed her a small bundle of dried tinder and a striking flint. "You light it." Her hands trembled. She had never been allowed near the stove at her stepfather's house. She knelt on the rough floorboards, the cold seeping through the wool trousers. She fumbled with the flint. A spark flew. Died another. "Not like that," he grunted. He knelt beside her, his sighs blotting out the light from the fire. He took the flint. Quick, hard strike down. He struck it. A bright spark caught the tinder, which smouldered, then bloomed into a tiny flame. He did not look at her. He just built the fire, adding the kindling, then the larger logs. "Now the beans," he said, standing. He pointed to a burlap sack in the corner. "Pot is there. Water is in the bucket. You sort them. Any rocks, any black ones, you toss them out. You wash them, then you boil them." He was not asking. He was giving her the terms of her survival. She nodded, her throat tight. While the wind howled and the small cabin grew warm, she worked. Her first task was her feet. The bandages were stiff, and the pain had returned. A deep, hot throb, where he was at the table cleaning his rifle, the pieces laid out on an oiled cloth. I need more water," she said. He looked up. He saw her glance at her feet. He put the rifle down, got the kettle from the hearth, and poured warm water into the basin he had used the night before. He brought it to the cot along with fresh rags and the pot of salve. He watched, expecting to have to do it himself. Delilah took a ragged breath. She unwrapped the crude bandages. The sight of her own feet made her stomach turn. The cuts were deep, the skin around them an angry purple, swollen and raw. She dipped a rag in the warm water, wringing it out. She pressed the rag to the worst cut. She bit her lips so hard she tasted blood, but she made no sound. WDE watched her. He watched her clean every wound, her movements jerky with pain but determined. He saw the set of her jaw, the way she refused to cry out. When she was finished, she looked up, her face pale. He said nothing. He just pushed the salve pot closer. She worked the thick, dark salve into the wounds, her touch gentle. Then she rewrapped both feet with the clean strips of cloth. Only when she was done, her hands shaking, did he turn back to his rifle. They existed in this silence for 2 days. The world was nothing but the howl of the wind and the crackle of the fire. Wade taught her to check the snares he kept on the porch, how to bank the fire at night. She cooked the beans and the salt pork, and she mended the small tears in his flannel shirts, her stitches tiny and neat, a skill from a different life. On the 3rd night, the silence finally broke. They sat by the fire, the storm a dull roar. Delilah had been quiet for an hour, staring into the flames. "He told the preacher I was obedient," she whispered. Wade did not look up from the harness strap he was mending. "My mother," she continued, her voice gaining a small strength. "She died when I was 10. She was soft. She liked to sing. Ella's, my stepfather, he hated the singing. She traced the grain of the wooden floor. He was a hard man. He read the Bible every night, mostly the parts about punishment. He said the world was full of sin, and a woman's vanity was the worst of it. He said I was vain for wanting to read, for brushing my hair too long. WDE's hands stilled on the leather. When Mr. Croft's wife died, Elias started taking his suppers at the mercantile. Mr. Croft is wealthy. He owns everything. Elias owed him. He owed him for supplies for drink. She looked at Wade, her eyes wide and clear in the firelight. I was the payment. He told me it was my duty. He said God required it. I had no say. No one asked me. She pulled the quilt tighter. I tried to be obedient. I truly did. But when he locked that door, when he started, I knew it was not what God required. It was not holy. It was a sin. She finished breathless, ashamed. She had said too much. She had burdened this silent, hard man with her ugliness. WDE sat for a long time. He did not grunt. He did not nod. He set the harness strap aside. He stood, went to the stove and poured a cup of coffee. He drank it. Then he went to a small wooden chest in the corner, one she had not seen him open. He took something out. He walked back and dropped it on the cot beside her. It was a heavy wool coat, dark grey, lined with fleece. It was old but clean and impossibly warm. It will be cold when the storm breaks, he said. He went back to his chair and picked up the harness. Delilah stared at the coat. It was the kindest thing anyone had ever given her. The next day, she saw him pick up the ruined wedding dress. It was still in the corner where he had tossed it, a frozen, muddy heap. He brought it to the table. She watched, horrified. As he laid it out, he took a heavy needle and a spool of thick black thread from his kit. He did not try to fix the lace. He did not try to make it beautiful. He found the long, clean slice he had made with his knife. From the neck to the hem, and with rough, strong utilitarian stitches, he sewed the dress shut. He was not mending a wedding gown. He was mending a piece of fabric. He was making it whole, making it useful. When he was finished, he folded it with a strange precision and placed it on the chest. He did not look at her, but Delilah understood. He was closing the wound. He was giving her back a piece of armor, however scarred. The storm raged on. That night the cabin felt smaller, the air thicker. The shared tasks and the forced proximity had woven a strange, thin thread between them. The fear she felt had lessened, replaced by a deep, unsettling curiosity. They sat by the fire again, she on the floor, wrapped in her new coat. He in his chair, sharpening his knife on a wet stone. The sound was rhythmic, metallic. "Scrape, scrape, Wade?" she asked. She had heard him say his own name to his horse once in the barn, and had kept it a secret. The scraping stopped. He looked at her. I wanted to ask," she faltered under his gaze. Have you ever been married?" The question hung in the air. He turned his head, staring deep into the fire. The light caught the hard planes of his face, the old pale scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. He looked like a man carved from the same mountains that trapped them. She thought he would not answer. She thought he would get up and leave or tell her to Bessalent. "No," he said. The word was a stone dropped into a well. He was quiet for so long she thought that was all. But then he spoke again, his voice low, almost to himself. "I tried to save someone once. She didn't want saving." He said it with such finality, such bitterness, that Delilah knew it was a door slamming shut. He was talking about a woman he had loved, who had rejected him or who had been lost. She felt a pang of sorrow for him, a man so clearly defined by his failures. "You saved me," she whispered. She had not meant to say it. The words just came out. You didn't have to. You could have left me out there. I know you wanted to." He looked at her, his eyes dark, unreadable. She felt a desperate, aching need to make him understand, to show him that this one thing, this one act, was not a failure. She was sitting near his chair. She reached out, her hand trembling, and laid it softly on the back of his, the one that rested on his knee, the knuckles white. His skin was rough, calloused and hot. A jolt, sharp and clean as the striking flint, shot up her arm. It was not a gentle feeling. It was a shock. It was the first human touch she had felt in her life that was not a precursor to pain. WDE's entire body went rigid. He stopped breathing. His head snapped toward her. His eyes, which had been distant and cold, were now blazing. He looked at her hand on his as if it were a snake that had just bitten him. The air in the cabin crackled. The space between them, once a frozen gulf, was now a roaring fire. He could smell the soap on her skin, the clean scent of her hair. She could feel the raw, coiled power in him, held back by the thinnest thread. She gasped and pulled her hand away as if burned. But the damage was done. Wade stood up. He did not just stand. He exploded from the chair, sending it scraping back onto the floor. He was breathing hard, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He looked at her, not with anger, but with a kind of raw terror. "Don't," he said. The word was a rasp torn from his throat. Delilah shrank back, pulling her knees to her chest. "I'm sorry. I just wanted to thank you." "I don't need thanks," he snarled. He was backing away toward the door as if she were the one who was dangerous. He grabbed his heavy coat from the peg. It was the coat he wore in the worst blizzards. "Wait, no!" she cried, scrambling to her feet. "The storm, you cannot go out." "I sleep in the barn," he said, jamming his feet into his boots. He did not bother with the laces. He grabbed his rifle. "Stay inside," he commanded. "Bolt the door. Do not open it." He wrenched the door open. The storm lunged into the room, a screaming vortex of ice and wind that sent embers scattering from the hearth. He plunged into the white darkness and slammed the door behind him. Delilah ran to the door, her bandaged feet screaming in protest. She slid the heavy wooden bar into place. She was safe. She was locked in and she was alone. The barn was frigid, the wind finding every crack in the old wood. Wade did not light a lantern. He did not need one. He stumbled through the darkness to the stall that held his horse. Steady whinnied, a low, nervous sound, sensing the agitation in the man. Wade leaned his forehead against the rough, hewn wood of the stall, his rifle slipping from his numb fingers. He was shaking, not from the cold. He was shaking from that one simple touch. Her hand, it had been so light, so warm. He slid down the wall, sinking into the hay. He put his head in his hands. He had not lied. He'd tried to save someone, but it was not a woman he had loved. It was a woman he had killed. The memory, always waiting, took him. The war, the raid on the settlement in Kansas. They were told it was a nest of sympathizers. They were told to burn it. He remembered the fire, the smell of pine and hay and burning flesh. He saw the farmhouse, the one he'd lit himself, and in the upstairs window, a woman. She was holding a kilt. He had stopped, horrified at his work. "Jump!" he had screamed at her. "I'll catch you." The woman had just stared at him. She stared with a hatred so pure it had burned him more than the flames. She did not scream for help. She did not try to run. She held her child and she cursed his name. She cursed him as a butcher, as a godless animal. She clutched her child, turned her back on the window, and walked into the heart of the fire. She had not wanted saving. She'd chosen death over rescue by a man like him. He could still hear her scream. It was a sound that lived in his bones. It was the same scream he had heard in Delilah's nightmare. He looked at his own hands, dark shapes in the gloom. They were stained. They were built for killing, for burning, for destroying. And that girl, that child in his cabin, had touched him. She had looked at him with gratitude, with innocence. Wade Coulter buried his face in the musty hay. He was not a savior, he was the fire. And if he let her, if he let himself feel that jolt again, he would burn her alive. The world was born new. For 4 days, there had been only the sound of the wind, a high, thin scream that seemed to come from inside the skull. On the 5th morning, Delilah woke to an absolute deafening silence. The fire in the stove was low. The cabin was cold, and the window was not grey, but a brilliant, blinding white. She heard the sound of the bar being lifted from the outside. Wade had unblocked it. The door creaked open, and a column of light sharp as a blade cut across the floor. Udi stood in the opening, a dark silhouette against the impossible brightness. He did not look at her. He just breathed in the new air. "It broke," he said. Delilah slid off the cot, her feet still wrapped, protested, but the sharp agony had dulled to a deep, heavy throb. She pulled on the fleece-lined coat he had given her and limped to the doorway. The sight stole her breath. The world was buried. The snow was piled in great sculpted drifts, high as the cabin's roof in some places. The sky was a piercing, painful blue. The sun on this snow was so bright it made her eyes water. There were no trees, only white pillars where they stood. The silence was perfect. "The water buckets are low," Wade said, his voice quiet as if not to break the spell. He picked up 2 empty wooden buckets. "We'll gather snowmelt. You stay on the porch. The drifts ain't stable." She followed him onto the small porch. The cold was clean, not the biting, malicious cold of the storm. He pointed to a patch on the south side of the roof where the sun had already begun its work. Icicles thick as a man's arm hung from the eaves. He broke one off, clean, and dropped it into a bucket. He started gathering the cleaners now from the top of the drifts he could reach. Delilah, eager to help to earn her keep, began breaking the smaller icicles and adding them. They worked insolence. The only sound, the crunch of the snow and the clatter of ice. When the buckets were full, they brought them inside, setting them near the stove to melt. "I need to check the traps, and the woodpile is buried." He paused, looking at her. He seemed uncomfortable, awkward in this new shared world. His escape to the barn had created a new tension, a line she knew she must not cross. I can help," she said, her voice small. "I can cut vegetables if you have them. I can mend." He looked at her, then at his own supplies. "We're low on kindling." He went to his tool chest and took out a small knife, its blade no longer than her hand, but razor sharp. He also grabbed a log of dry pine. He sat on the hearth, not near her, and began to shave the wood. He did not chop. He drew the blade along the grain, and thin, perfect curls of wood fell away. "This is how you make tinder that catches," he said. "You don't fight the wood. You find its grain. You use the blade." He held the knife out to her handle first. She looked at it, then at him. It was a tool. It was trust. She took it, her fingers brushing his. He did not pull away this time, but her tensed. She tried. Her first attempt was clumsy. The blade bit the wood and stopped. "No," he grunted. "Let the knife do the work. Your wrist, not your arm." He put his hand over hers. His calloused, hard fingers closed over her knuckles. He was not touching her. He was guiding the tool, but his heat enveloped her hand. He drew it down the wood. "A perfect curl of pine sprang up like that," he said. He released her hand immediately, as if he had touched the hot stove. He stood and grabbed his coat. "Don't cut yourself." He left. Delilah spent the next 2 hours shaving the pine. She focused on the blade, on the scent of the wood, on the simple repetitive task. She focused on anything but the feeling of his hand closing over hers. A rhythm developed. It was not planned. It simply grew, born of necessity and the vast, empty silence of the mountains. WDE was gone most of the day. He shoveled pathways, dug out his woodpile, and reset his traps. He came back each evening covered in snow, exhausted and silent. Delilah took over the cabin. She kept the fire off. She boiled the water. She learned to sort the beans and the dried corn. She cleaned the cabin with a ferocity, sweeping the floor, scrubbing the few pots until they shone. She was nesting. She was making herself useful. She was proving she was not a burden. He had brought back 2 rabbits one afternoon. He skinned them outside, his movements quick and brutal but economical. He handed her the meat. She looked at it, her stomach churning. She had never cooked meat. Elias had always said it was a man's work, or that she would spoil it. "I don't know how," she whispered, ashamed. WDE sighed, a sound of deep impatience, but he did not yell. He took the pot, cut the meat, and threw it in with water and the last of his onions. "You make stew," he said. "You boil it, you add salt, you wait. It ain't complicated." He left her with it. She tented the pot as if it were a bomb. She was terrified of failing. She added more salt. She kept the fire roaring hot. When he came back hours later, the cabin was filled with a thick, acrid smell. Delilah was near tears, her face flushed from the heat. "I think I burned it." Wade came to the stove. He lifted the lid. A cloud of steam billowed out. The stew was a thick, dark paste at the bottom of the pot. He took a spoon, dipped it in, and tasted it. Delilah braced herself. She waited for the curse, the anger, the back of his hand. WDE's expression did not change. He chewed. He swallowed. He looked at the stew, then at her. A strange sound rumbled in his chest. It was a short, rough cough. He turned away, but she saw his shoulders shaking. It took her a full 10 seconds to realize he was laughing. It was a silent, rusty laugh, as if the mechanism for it were broken, but it was real. "Well," he said, his voice choked, "it ain't rabbit anymore. It's salt and it's char." He took the pot, went to the door, and dumped the black mess into the snow. Delilah stared. "You're not angry." He turned, the smile gone, but the hardness in his eyes had softened. "It's just stew. Girl, we'll eat beans." That night, they ate beans and hardtack, sitting at the small table. It was the first meal they had shared, not as captive and captor, but as two people in a room. The burnt stew had done more than the storm to settle the air between them. Wade began to talk. Not much, but enough. He told her how to tell a fox track from a coyote's. He told her which pine cones held edible nuts. She listened, soaking in the simple practical knowledge. It was a language of survival, not judgment. The thaw came in earnest. The world began to drip. The sun had a new, genuine warmth. One afternoon, the cabin grew stuffy. Wade had been splitting logs he'd salvaged from the woodpile. He came back inside sweating and pulled his damp flannel shirt off. Delilah was mending his other shirt. She looked up and her breath caught. She had seen him as a large man, a shape of power and shadow. Now in the bright afternoon light, she saw the man himself. His back was to her as he washed his face and chest in the basin. His shoulders were broad, the muscles moving smoothly under his skin, but his skin was not perfect. It was a map of his life. She saw the long, pale line of the scar on his face continued down his neck and on his back. There were two puckered circular scars, one high on his shoulder, one low near his ribs. Bullet holes. He turned, wiping his face on a small towel. He saw her staring. Delilah dropped her gaze, her face burning hot. She felt a strange, terrifying curl deep in her stomach. It was a heavy pulling ache. It was not the fear she had felt for Mr. Croft. It was not the dutiful obedience she had been taught by Elias. This was something else. This was a deep, painful curiosity, a longing. She wanted to know what his skin felt like. She wanted to trace the scars. The feeling terrified her. It felt like a sin. It felt like the vanity her stepfather had always warned her about. She jabbed the needle into the fabric, her hands shaking. Wade watched her for a moment. He saw her flush, the way her breathing quickened. He knew that look. He had seen it before in other women, in other lives, and it had always meant trouble. He put his shirt back on, his movement stiff. The icy rhythm of the cabin was broken. The air was charged again. That night the silence was heavy. The laughter over the burnt stew was gone. Delilah could not stop seeing his back, the muscles, the scars. Wade could not stop seeing the look in her eyes. He sat by the fire, oiling his rifle, his back to her. Delilah could not stand the tension. She had to know. She had to understand the man who had saved her. The man who laughed at burnt stew but flinched from her touch. The man who was covered in the marks of violence but had shown heronly gentleness. She stood from the cot. She walked across the small room. He heard her, and his hand stopped moving on the rifle. She stopped just behind him. "Wade, what?" It was not a question. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice a whisper. "In this cabin, all alone." He did not answer. He put the rifle down and stared into the fire. You're not like the men in town," she pressed, emboldened by the silence. "You know things. You're not just hiding. You're punishing yourself." He turned his head. His profile was hard in the firelight. "You should go to sleep, girl." "I want to know," she said, "please." He let out a long breath, the sound of utter weariness. He had carried this for so long, a heavy stone in his gut, and now the slip of a girl was asking to lift it. "I was a soldier," he said, his voice flat. "For the Union." He paused. She waited. "We were in Kansas near the end. We were chasing raiders. We got word they were holed up in a settler camp, that the settlers were arming them, feeding them. The command came down." He picked up a piece of kindling and stared at it. "We were ordered to burn it, to leave nothing?" Delilah put her hand over her mouth. "It was just a small place," Wade said, his voice hollow. "A small church. We rode in at dusk. They didn't even have guards posted. They were farmers. They had women, children." He snapped the kindling in two, his large hands crushing the wood. "My detail took the biggest house. We were told to clear it and light it. I did. I lit the fire myself. He turned to look at her. His eyes were not cold now. They were burning. They were filled with a terrible ancient pain. I saw her in the window, a woman. She was holding a baby. She looked at me. She didn't scream. She just looked at me. He was back there. He was back in the smoke in the fire. I tried to. I told her to jump, but she just stood there. She looked at me like I was the devil, and she walked back into the fire. He tossed the broken wood into the flames. She was right. I didn't leave the army. I ran. I ran until I found a place where I couldn't hurt anyone else. A place where I couldn't light any more fires. I haven't forgiven myself. I never will. The cabin was silent, save for the crackle of the fire. Delilah's eyes were full of tears, but not for the woman, for him. She understood in a way he never could. What it meant to be ordered, what it meant to have no choice. She moved from behind his chair and slowly knelt on the hearth, in front of him. The air was charged electric with his confession. She wanted to touch him. She wanted to heal him. She reached out just as she had in the storm. She laid her hand on his knee. This time, it was not an accident. He flinched, his whole body recoiling. "Wade," she whispered. "I just want to feel safe with someone." The words undid him. He looked at her, kneeling before him, her eyes shining with tears, her face open, vulnerable. She was not accusing him. She was asking him for comfort. "Delilah," he rasped. "Don't. I'm not the man you think I am. I'm not safe. I'm not the kind of man you are meant to want." She didn't listen. She saw the pain in his eyes, the self-loathing, and she saw the good man underneath, the man who had carried her from the snow, the man who had laughed at her cooking. She leaned in, trembling. She was terrified of him, of herself, but she did it. She leaned in and rested her forehead against his chest. She could feel the frantic hammering of his heart. He did not move away. She raised her head. She looked at his mouth. She leaned in further, hear ye's closing. He met her. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of collision. It was tender, hesitant, and desperate. His lips were rough, his beard scratching her chin. But the kiss itself was gentle. It was a question. It was a surrender. Her body, which had known only cold and fear, bloomed with a heat that was terrifying. It was a deep liquid warmth that started in her stomach and spread to her limbs. She pulled back, her breath a gasp. "It's my first," she whispered, the confession tumbling out. "My first kiss," she looked at him, her eyes wide. "It hurts so much," she said, her voice breaking. "Running away, my feet. I thought I would die. It hurt more than it does now." She was connecting everything. Her pain, her fear, her rescue, this new blazing feeling that broke him. The warning in his eyes was consumed by a raw, desperate yearning. He saw her pain. He saw her innocence. And he saw her need. He put his hands on her arms, his grip hard, and lifted her to her feet. And then, with one smooth, powerful motion, he scooped her up into his arms. Delilah cried out, a small sound of surprise. Her arms went around his neck instinctively. He carried her the few steps to the cot. The air was thick, suffocating. This was it. This was what she had run from. But it was not the same. It was not Mr. Croft. This was Wade. He laid her down on the quilts. He did not release her. He loomed over her, his hands braced on either side of her head. He was breathing like a man who had run a mile. He looked into her eyes, and the battle he was fighting was plain to see. He wanted her. He lowered his head and kissed her again. And this time there was no tenderness. It was pure starving hunger. It was the kiss of a man who had denied himself for years. It was rough and deep, and it took her breath. She trembled beneath him, her hands clutching his shirt. She was frightened, but she was not resisting. He broke the kiss. He looked at her parted lips, her wide, terrified, trusting eyes. He looked at this girl who had been sold, who had run, who had come to him with broken feet and a broken past. He saw the woman in the fire. He pushed himself off the cot, stumbling backward as if he had been shot. "Wade," Delilah whispered, sitting up, her voice shaking. He stood in the middle of the room, his back to her, his hands clenched. "No, did I do something wrong?" she cried, the tears coming fast. He turned. His face was a mask of agony. "You did nothing wrong." He walked to the cot. He sat on the edge, but he did not touch her. "Delilah," he said, his voice, "you deserve more than this. You deserve more than a man's need. You are hurt. You are scared. You are turning pain into want." He finally looked at her. "I won't be the man who takes advantage of that. I won't be another man who just takes." She stared at him, the tears streaming down her face. She was not crying from fear. She was crying from a profound, shattering sense of relief. He had stopped. He was the only man in her life who had ever said no for her. She collapsed, not in passion, but in exhaustion. She cried into the quilts. All the fear of Elias, all the terror of Mr. Croft, all the confusion of the last week pouring out of her. WDE's resolve broke. He sat on the cot and pulled her against him. He did not lay her down. He just pulled her onto his lap, his arms wrapping around her as she sobbed. He held her fully clothed, rocking her gently, his hands stroking her hair. "You're safe," he whispered into her hair. "You're safe." He held her like that all night. The fire burned down to embers. The cabin grew cold. Neither of them slept. He held her through the nightmares, and she clung to him, a survivor clinging to the first solid rock she had ever found. The night he held her changed the air in the cabin. When morning came, he had not moved. She had woken, still curled against his chest, her face tucked beneath his chin. He was awake. He had been awake all night, his arms a rigid, warm cage around her. The moment she stirred, he had released her, his movements stiff as if his muscles had locked. "The floor is cold," he said, his voice a rasp. "You should stay in the cot." He had risen and gone out to the barn, back to his own space, leaving her with a scent of pine and worn wool on her skin, and a confusion that was heavier than the quilts. But the coldness was gone. The hard, sharp edge of him had been blunted. He still slept in the barn, but when he was in the cabin, he spoke to her. He did not sit with his back to her. He sat at the table, and he watched her as she worked. Spring arrived not as a gentle guest, but as a muddy, violent thaw. The world, silent for so long, was now filled with the sound of roaring water. The snowdrifts collapsed. The streams overflowed. The ground, frozen hard a siren, turned to a deep clinging mud. With the thaw came work. The cabin, which had been a fortress, now felt like a cage. "We need a garden," Wade said one morning, staring out the door at the patch of south-facing mud. "If you're to stay," the words hung in the air. "If you're to stay," Delilah looked up from the shirt she was mending. "I can help. I know some about gardens. My mother had one." He nodded a short, sharp motion. "We need to turn the soil, but it's too wet. We'll build a raised bed." For the next week they worked. It was a new rhythm. He taught her how to use a small handsaw, how to measure the boards he had salvaged from a collapsed portion of the barn. Her hands, soft and pale, grew raw. She got a splinter, and he pulled it out with the tip of his knife. His touch so brief and concentrated it made her stomach flutter. She was healing. Her feet, though scarred, were whole. She could wear the heavy wool socks he gave her, and she limped only slightly. The work was hard, but it was good. It was the first time in her life her body had been used for her own survival. They hauled rocks from the creek bed to line the bottom of the wooden frame. They carried buckets of drier soil from the pine forest. They worked side by side, their shoulders sometimes brushing. Each time a jolt passed between them. They did not speak of the night he held her. They did not speak of the kiss. But it was there in every shared glance. In every moment he passed her a tool. One afternoon as they rested, their backs against the new empty garden bed, Delilah spoke into the silence. "If I didn't have to go back," she said, testing the words, "what could I do?" Wade was cleaning mud from his hands with a rag. He stopped. "What do you mean? In the town I was nothing. I was Elias's stepdaughter. I was Mr. Croft's property. I cannot be that again, but I cannot stay here forever, can I? I cannot be your burden." He turned to look at her. The sun was warm on her face, and the weeks of mountain air and steady food had brought a faint color to her cheeks. Her hair, which she now braided neatly, had grown thick. "You ain't a burden," he said, his voice low. "You work hard. You're quiet. But I am not a man. I cannot hunt. I cannot live like you. You can learn," he said. "You learned the stove. You learned the saw. He looked at her hands. "You read. I've seen you with the almanac," she flushed. "My mother taught me. Elias said it was a sin." "It ain't a sin. It's a tool, same as a knife." He tossed Therag aside. "You could be a teacher in a new place, a place where they don't know your name, or you could work in a dress shop. Your stitching is fine, finer than any I've seen." Delilah stared at him. He spoke of her as if she were a person of value, as if she had skills, a future. She had never once considered it. "But I have no money," she whispered. "I have nothing." "You have your hands," he said, standing up. "You have your mind. That ain't nothing." He offered her a hand to help her up. She took it, and his grip was strong and warm, and he did not let go for a moment longer than he had to. The hope was a fragile thing, like the first green shoots of the false helior. It was beautiful, and it was poison, because it was not real. A week later, the mud had dried enough for a ride. The supplies were gone. The flour sack was empty. The coffee tin was empty. The salt was gone. "I have to go to town," Wade said at breakfast. Delilah's spoon clattered into her bowl. The blood drained from her face. "Town?" she repeated. "We need supplies. I have pelts to trade." He would not meet her ayes. "It's 10 me. I will be gone the day." "He is there," she whispered. "Mr. Croft and Elias. They will see you. They will ask questions. I've gone to town before. They know me. I'm just a trapper in the hills. They don't know I have you. But what if they follow you?" The panic she had kept at bay for weeks came flooding back, cold and sharp. "What if you don't come back?" He stood and put on his heavy coat. He took his rifle from the rack. He checked the load. He then took his pistol from its holster and laid it on the table. "You know how this works," he said, his voice flat. He had shown her weeks ago how to load and fire it. She had hated the cold, heavy feel of it. "You bolt the door after me," he said. "You don't open it. Not for anyone. Not even if you think it's me. You wait until I give the signal." He had a low toot-note whistle like a mountain bird. "I don't care about the supplies," she said, her voice shaking. "We can eat rabbit. Please don't go. We need salt. Delilah for the meat and flour." He looked at her, his face hard, but his eyes were pained. "I will be back before dark." He left. She ran to the door, slid the heavy bar into place and leaned against it, her heart hammering. The cabin, her sanctuary, was now a prison, and it was empty. She spent the day in a haze of terror. She tried to work. She cleaned the cabin again. She sharpened the small knife. She went outside to the garden bed. But the silence of the mountains was no longer peaceful. It was threatening. Every snap of a twig was Elias. Every shadow was Mr. Croft. She went back inside and sat on the cot, the heavy pistol in her lap. She watched the sun move across the floor. It was the longest day of her life. Wade rode into the small, muddy valley that held the town. He hated this. He hated the smells of coal smoke and cheap whiskey. He hated the looks from the men who lounged on the boardwalk. He tied steady outside the mercantile. Mr. Silas Croft's name, painted in large, faded letters above the door. He took his bundle of pelts and went inside. The store was dim. A young man he didn't recognize was behind the counter. "Looking for Croft," Wade said, dropping the pelts. "Mr. Croft is busy," the young man said, eyeing Wade's rough clothes. "I can handle a trade. I need flour, salt, coffee, kerosene, and bacon." The clerk began to measure out the goods, weighing them against the value of the furs. Wade kept his head down, his gaze sweeping the store. "Quiet day," Wade grunted, trying to sound casual. "Too quiet," the clerk said. "Town's been on edge. Oh yeah, Mr. Croft's new wife, you hear about that? WDE's blood went cold." "No, ran off," the clerk whispered, leaning in. "Same night as the wedding. Just took off into the blizzard. Everyone thought she was dead. But Elias Thorne, her stepfather, he's saying different." WDE's hand drifted toward the pistol on his hip. "What's he saying? Says she was a thief. Says she plotted it. Stole Croft's savings from the cash box before she ran. Near $200. He says Croft is mad as a hornet." He's put up a reward, and Elias is telling everyone she's a criminal. They got a man out looking for her, a bounty man. WDE's face was a mask of stone, a thief. They'd made her a criminal. It wasn't just about bringing a wife back. It was about a reward. It was about a hanging. Damn, Wade muttered. He paid the difference for his supplies, his mind racing. He needed one more thing. He left the mercantile and went to Thesmall clapboard house at the end of the street, where a widow sold goods from her front room. He bought a pair of sturdy leather boots, small enough for a woman, and a dress of dark blue calico. He paid in silver. He did not care about the cost. He rode out of town, not looking back. He rode hard. The world had closed in. Time was not running out. It was gone. Delilah saw him at the edge of the clearing. He did not whistle. He just appeared, a dark shape on his horse, riding fast. She fumbled with the bar, her hands shaking, and threw the door open. She ran out onto the porch, not caring about the mud. He swung down from the saddle, his face a grim grey mask. He looked exhausted. He looked shaken. "Wade," she whispered. He just pushed past her, carrying the sacks. He dropped them on the floor. "You were right," he said, his voice rough. "They're looking for you. Oh, my, Mr. Croft and Elias." He turned to face her. "He's telling people you're a thief, that you stole money from Croft." Delilah's world tilted. "What? No, I stole nothing. I ran with nothing, just my shawl." "I know," Wade said, "but it means they ain't just looking for a runaway wife. They're hunting a criminal. There's a reward." She sank onto the cot, her legs giving way. A reward. They would hang her. She looked at Wade, her eyes wide with a new, terrible fear. "They will find me," she said, "and they will find you. They will say you helped me. They will hang you too." She stood up frantic. "I have to go. I have to leave. I will bring them down on you. Be quiet," he commanded. His voice wasn't angry. It was sharp, cutting through her panic. "You ain't going anywhere. Not tonight. You wouldn't last an hour." He went back outside and returned with a parcel wrapped in brown paper. He dropped it on the cot in front of her. She looked at it confused. Her hands trembled as she untied the string. It was the dress, simple dark blue calico with a high neck and long sleeves. It was a dress for working, for living, not for being sold. Beneath it were the boots. They were new, the leather smelling rich and clean. Delilah lifted the dress, holding it to her chest. She looked at the boots, built to walk, to run, to be free. Noon had ever given her a gift, not a real one. Elias had given her scraps. Mr. Croft had given her a shackle. Wade had given her armor. She looked up at him, her eyes flooding with tears. He was standing by the fire, his back to her, his shoulders slumped. He had gone into the den of her enemies. He had faced them, and he had returned not just with salt, but with a future. He was shaken, he was in danger, and he had done it for her. The tears that fell were not tears of fear. They were tears of a profound, aching realization. That night the air was different. The threat was no longer a distant possibility. It was a breathing thing just outside the door. They ate their meal of fresh bread and bacon in silence. Every word that could be said had been said. Wade took his bedroll and laid it on the floor. As he had the night he held her, he sat his back against the wall and began to clean his rifle. He was preparing for a war. Delilah watched him. She watched his large, scarred hands move over the metal, his movements precise, economical. He was a man of violence. He was the gentlest man she had ever known. He was a killer, and he was her savior. She had been a thing, a commodity, a runaway, a thief. In his eyes, she was a woman. She stood from the cot. He did not look up, but his hands stilled. The cabin was lit only by the low fire. She moved to the basin and poured water. She washed her face, she washed her hands. She unbraided her hair, letting it fall over her shoulders. She turned to face him. He was watching her now, his eyes dark, his face tight in the shadows. She Patha. Hands to the buttons of the wool shirt she wore, the one that belonged to him. Slowly, one by one, she undid them. She pulled the shirt from her shoulders, letting it fall to the floor. She stood before him in her thin linen shift. She heard him take a sharp, ragged breath. She walked across the cold floor until she stood over him. He looked up at her, his face a mask of agony, and a desire so deep it terrified her. "Delilah," he rasped, a warning. "Don't." "Last time," she whispered, her voice shaking but clear. "I was afraid, and I was in pain, and you were right. I was turning it into something else." She knelt in front of him on his bedroll. She was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I am not afraid tonight," she said, "and I am not in pain. This is my choice." He closed his eyes. A tremor ran through his entire body. He did not speak. He did not move. He was giving her the silence, letting her lead. She leaned in and kissed him. It was not the clumsy, desperate kiss of their first encounter. It was slow, it was tender, it was a question, and it was an answer. He did not pull her or grab her. He opened his mouth to her, and his kiss was one of surrender. When she pulled back, his eyes were open. The battle was over. The yearning had won. His hands, which had been clenched at his sides, came up. They trembled. He did not touch her body. He cupped her face, his rough thumbs stroking her cheekbones as if she were made of fragile glass. "This," he started, his voice thick, "this ain't what you think." "It is what I choose," she said again. He kissed her, then a deep, searching kiss that held all the loneliness of his life. He eased her down onto the bedroll, pulling the quilts over them, shielding them from the cold. He undressed her slowly, his gaze reverent. His fingers traced the line of her collarbone, her ribs. He saw the faint, pale scar on her shoulder, a thin line from a switch had used years ago. He leaned down and pressed his lips to it. Delilah gasped, a sob catching in her throat. He kissed the new puckered scars on her feet. He kissed the calluses on her palms from the work they had done. He was honoring her. All the parts of her that had been broken, all the parts that had healed. She trembled when he was bare beside her. The heat of his skin a shock. She had never seen a man not like this. He saw her fear, the slight tensing of her body. He stopped. "I can stop," he whispered, his forehead resting against hers. "You just say the word." "It's not that," she whispered. I'm afraid it will. I was told it hurts." "It might," he said, his voice raw with honesty. "The first time, but it ain't meant to be just that. I will be gentle. I won't rush." He kissed her eyelids. You tell me if you just tell me." He was slow. He was patient. He moved with a tenderness that was excruciating. He taught her body a new language, one that was not about obedience or fear, but about discovery. When he finally joined with her, she cried out a sharp, brief sound. It did hurt, a sharp, tearing pain. He froze instantly, his whole body rigid above her. "Delilah." She opened her eyes, tears spilling onto her temples, but she was not looking at him in terror. She was looking at him with a raw, profound trust. "It's all right," she whispered. Don't leave me." He did not move. He just held himself above her, letting her body adjust, letting the pain fade. He kissed her deeply, a kiss that poured all of his own pent-up pain and loneliness into her. And the pain did fade. It melted, replaced by a strange, stretching, full sensation. It was replaced by the heat of his skin, the solid protective weight of him. It was replaced by the overwhelming spiritual ripeness of being held by this man. He began to move slowly, a rhythm as old as the mountains. She clung to him, her hands on his scarred back, her legs stangled with his. This was not a sin. This was not a sale. This was a claiming. She let her own pain melt into his. She let the memory of Elias and Croft be burned away by the clean fire of this man. He trembled, his control breaking, and he buried his face in her hair, his body arching, a low groan torn from his chest. She held him, held him as he had held her, as he found our release that was as much agony as it was relief. They lay tangled in the quilts for a long time. The only sound was the fire and their breathing. Delilah had her head on his chest. His heart was finally slowing. He stroked her hair, his hand heavy, his touch still shaking. "Wade," she whispered into the darkness. He kissed the top of her head. "I've never felt," she began, trying to find the words. "I've never felt safe before." "Not really. I don't think I've ever felt anything close to love before." The word hung in the dark cabin. Love. Wade went still. He said nothing. The hand in her hair paused. He did not say it back. He could not. The word was a foreign country, a place he had burned to the ground. Butte pulled her closer, his arm tightening around her, a possessive, desperate grip. He held her as if he was shielding her from the entire world. She fell asleep, safe in his arms, the smell of him, the feel of him imprinted on her skin. Wade Coulter did not sleep. He stared into the dying embers of the fire, holding the woman who had just given him her first and her only choice. He listened to her soft breathing. He watched the firelight play over her face. He knew the bounty man was coming. He knew the world was coming to tear her away from him. He watched her as if he were memorizing her. He memorized the curve of her cheek, the line of her mouth, the exact shade of her hair in the faint red light. He was branding her image onto his soul, preparing for the fight he knew was just beyond the door. The dawn broke cold and grey, chasing the warmth of the night from the cabin. D.E. was already dressed when Delilah opened her eyes. He was standing by the door, not oiling his rifle but sliding shells into the chambers of his shotgun. The intimacy of the night evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp dread. He had not slept in his bedroll. He had slept with her, his arms a fortress around her. But he had risen before the first light, a man on a mission. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep and new fear. He didn't turn. The metallic click of a shell sliding home was the only answer for a moment. "They won't stop," he said, his voice flat. "A bounty man. Men like that don't quit. They'll search every ridge, every hollow. They'll find this place." "Then we have to run," she said, scrambling from the cot, pulling the quilt around her. "We can pack the supplies. We can go north like you said." "Run where?" He turned to face her. His eyes were hard, but not with the coldness she had first seen. This was a different kind of hardness. It was the resolve of a man who had finally drawn a line. There ain't a place in this territory we can go where a man with a reward won't follow. We'll be looking over our shoulder every day of our lives. You'll be looking over your shoulder, but you can't. What are you doing? She asked again, though she already knew. I'm finishing it. He laid the shotgun against the wall and buckled his pistol belt around his waist. He checked their vulva. They made you a thief. I'm going to make them unmake it. You're going to town. It was not a question, it was a statement of horror. Wade, no, they'll kill you. You said it yourself. Elias, Mr. Croft, they have a bounty. They'll have you arrested. They will hang you for helping me. She ran to him, grabbing the front of his rough wool shirt. She was still in her shift, her hair unbound. You can't, please. I would rather run. I would rather spend my life running with you than have you. Have you die for me? Please, Wade. They are wicked men. He looked down at her, his face a mask of granite. He put his hands on her shoulders. I've been running my whole life. Delilah, I ran from the war. I ran from what I did. I ran from that woman in the fire. I'm done running. But this is not your fight, she cried, tears welling. This is my shame, my past. Don't you see? You're clean of it. If you go there, you'll be stained with it, just like I am. They're not going to take you again, not while I'm breathing. He bent his head and kissed her. It was not the tender, exploring kiss of the night before. It was a kiss of branding, hard and deep, and full of a terrible finality. It tasted of coffee and gunpowder. He pulled away, his hands tight on her arms. You bolt this door. You keep the pistol. You don't open it for any man, not even the sheriff. You wait for my signal, do you understand me? She was sobbing, her hands clutching his shirt. Don't do this, don't leave me. I'll be back, he said. He unwrapped her fingers from his shirt, his touch gentle but firm. He pushed her back toward the cot. Bar the door. He picked up the shotgun. He opened the door, stepped out into the cold morning light, and did not look back. Delilah, shaking, ran to the door. She watched him stride to the barn, his back straight, his steps measured. Helid steady out, saddled the horse, and mounted in one fluid motion. He rode out of the clearing, the shotgun resting in the crook of his arm. She slammed the door and dropped the heavy wooden bar into place. The sound was a hollow boom, sealing her in. She was alone. She ran to the table and grabbed the pistol. It was cold, heavy, and real. She checked the load as he had shown her hands trembling so badly she nearly dropped the bullets. She sat on the cot, the pistol in her lap, and began to wait. The ride to town was 10 miles of cold mud and wind. Wade did not feel it. The fire in his gut kept him warm. He was not a man given to planning, but he had a plan now. It was simple. It was direct. He would find Croft and Elias Thorne. He would take them to the sheriff. He would make them tell the truth. He would use his words first, and if words failed, he would use the shotgun. He had lived in the shadow of his own sin for so long. He had forgotten what it felt to stand in the light. Delilah, with her choice, with her trust, had pulled him from that shadow, and he would sooner burn the whole world down than let her be dragged back into the darkness. He rode into the center of town. It was just past 9 in the morning. The muddy street was quiet. He ignored the mercantile. He knew where he would find them. He dismounted in front of the saloon, the only one in town. He tied steady to the rail, his movements deliberate. He did not unbuckle his pistol. He took the shotgun from its scabbard. He pushed the swinging doors open and stepped inside. The saloon was dim, smelling of stale beer and unwashed bodies. 3 men were at the bar. The bartender was wiping a glass, and at a table in the back corner sat Silas Croft and Elias Thorne. They were drinking whiskey. When the doors opened, they looked up. Elias's eyes widened. He recognized the mountain man who had bought supplies. Silas Croft just scowled. "We're close to Trappers this early," Croft grunted. Wade did not move from the door. He held the shotgun low, its barrels pointed at the floor, but his thumb was on the hammer. "My name is Wade Coulter," he said. His voice was not loud, but it filled the room. The men at the bar turned slowly. The bartender stopped wiping. "I'm here about the girl," Wade said. Elias Thorne's face went from surprise to a sneer. "The girl? What girl?" Delilah rose. "The one you sold. The one you lied about." Silas Croft stood up, his chair scraping on the floor. He was a thick, angry man. "Who in the hell are you?" "That is my wife, and she is a thief. There's a reward." "She stole nothing," Wade said, his voice dropping an octave. "And she ain't your wife. Not by any law God or man would recognize you. Bought her, and Elias here sold her, and you're both liars." Elias Thorne was on his feet now, his face purple. "Now you listen here. That girl is a wicked, sinful runaway. She's my kin, and I'll see her hanged for what she did. She stole $200 from Mr. Croft's safe. She ran with nothing but a shawl," Wade said, taking a step into the room. "She nearly died in the snow. I found her. I've been feeding her. She had no money." Croft's eyes narrowed. You found her? Then you're harboring a fugitive. You're an accomplice. I'm the man telling you to call off your dogs." Wade said, "You're both going to walk with me to the sheriff's office. You're going to tell him you lied. You're going to tell him there was no theft, and you're going to rescind the reward." Croft let out a sharp, barking laugh. "You think you can walk in here with that scattergun and tell me what to do in my own town?" "I'm not telling you," Wade said. "I'm giving you one chance." "Or what?" Elias sneered. He was a coward, but he felt brave with Croft beside him. "You'll shoot us in front of witnesses." "I'm hoping I don't have to," Wade said. Croft's hand moved toward the pistol on his own hip. "You're a dead man, Coulter." But Wade was faster. He had been living with violence his entire life. Croft was a merchant who played at being tough. Wade raised the shotgun to his hip. The movement was a blur. "Don't," Wade said. Croft froze, his hand hovering over his gun. "Both of you," Wade said. "Put your pistols on the table slow." Croft, his face slick with sweat, unbuckled his belt and let it fall. Elias, shaking, pulled a small revolver from his coat and dropped it. "Now," Wade said, "we walk." He had them. He had won. But he had misjudged IAS Thorne. The man's greed was gone, replaced by a pure venomous spite. "You're betting her, aren't you?" Elias hissed, his voice like a snake. "That's what this is. You found her, and you've been ringing on my kin like an animal. You're just as foul as she is." Wade's face tightened. "Shut your mouth, Thor. It's the truth, ain't it?" Elias laughed. A high, thin sound. She was always a sly one. Looked at me with those eyes. I knew what she was, a common. "And you? You're her." Wade did not fire the shotgun. He moved. In 2 long strides, he crossed the room. He slammed the butt of the shotgun into Croft's chest, sending him crashing back over the table. Then he dropped the shotgun and grabbed Elias Thorne by throat. He lifted the smaller man clear off his feet and slammed him against the wall. The sound of his head hitting the wood was a dull, wet crack. Bottles rattled on the shelf. WDE's vision went red. He saw the woman in the fire. He saw Elias's twisted face. He saw every man who had ever hurt someone weaker. He punched Elias in the stomach, a short, brutal blow that drove the air from his lungs. Elias gagged. "You spit on her name!" Wade roared, his voice inhuman. He drew back his fist, a fist calloused from axes and rifles, and aimed it at Elias's face. He was going to kill him. He was going to put his fist through the man's skull. "That's enough, Coulter." The voice was quiet, but it cut through the red haze. WDE froze. His fist was inches from Elias's nose. He turned his head. In the doorway stood the sheriff. He was an older man with a grey mustache and eyes that had seen too much. He held a Winchester rifle, and it was aimed at Wade's heart. DE let go of Elias, who crumpled to the floor, coughing and gagging. Silas Croft was, getting to his feet, pulling a derringer from his boot. "I wouldn't." "Silas," the sheriff said, not moving his rifle, "he'll have you in pieces before you clear the leather." Croft froze. Wade stood breathing heavily, the rage slowly draining, leaving him cold and shaking. "I saw the whole thing from my office," the sheriff said. "Heard most of it too." "Sheriff, this man is an accomplice," Croft bellowed, pointing a shaking finger. "He's harboring my wife, the thief." The sheriff looked at Croft with undisguised contempt. "Silas, you came home 2 months ago, the morning after that blizzard. You told me your new wife had run off. You didn't say a word about any stolen money, not for 2 weeks. It only became a theft when you realized folks were laughing at you." He then looked at Elias, who was crawling on the floor. "And you, Thorne, you're a pig." He looked back at Wade. "I know who you are, Coulter. You keep to yourself. You pay your way. You don't cause trouble." "He tried to kill me," Elias wheezed. "You're lucky he didn't," the sheriff said. He looked at Wade, and his eyes were tired. "I was the one who pulled her from the preacher's house. I saw the girl you married, Silas. She was 18. She was a child. I saw what you pulled her from, and I'd have run too." He jerked his rifle toward the door. "Get out, Keter." WDE stared. "The reward? It's a civil matter far as I'm concerned." The sheriff said, "And I'm not forming a posy to hunt a terrified girl. The bounty man will find no help from my office. Now go take your shotgun and get out of my town." Wade looked at Croft, who was staring at the sheriff in disbelief. He looked at Elias, who was spitting blood. "Just don't come back," the sheriff warned. "I can't protect you if you do this again. I can't stop Silas from hiring his own men. Now go." Wade picked up his shotgun. He backed out of the saloon, his eyes locked on Croft. He stepped out into the bright sunlight, his heart hammering. He had not won, but he had not lost. He had bought them time. He untied, steady, mounted, and rode out of town, his back rigid, expecting a bullet. None came at the cabin. Delilah had passed from panic to a dull, numb terror. The sun was high. Hours had passed. Every sound was an enemy. She was standing by the window, peering out a small crack, when she heard it, a horse, but it was in the wrong place. It was coming from the north, from the trees, not from the southern trail to town. She raised the pistol, her hands slick with sweat. A man stepped out of the trees. He was not Wade. He was a thin, tall man in a long duster. He had a rifle in his hands, and his eyes were scanning the clearing. He saw the cabin. He saw the faint wisp of smoke from the chimney she had forgotten to put out. He smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. He walked toward the cabin, his rifle held ready. "I know you're in there, little lady," he called out, his voice oily. "Mr. Croft just wants his property back and his money. You come on out and we'll make this easy." Delilah's blood ran cold. This was him, the bounty man. He had found her. Wade was not here. She was alone. She backed away from the door, raising the pistol. Her arms were shaking so badly she could barely aim. The man reached the porch. He tried the door. It was barred. "Don't be difficult," he sighed. He stepped back, raised his boot, and kicked the door hard. The wood groaned. The bar held. "That's a stout door," he called almost cheerfully. "But this ain't." He moved to the single window. With one quick motion, has smashed the butt of his rifle through the glass. Shards sprayed into the cabin. Delilah screamed. "There you are," he said, his voice closer. He reached a hand in, fumbling for the latch. "Get back!" Delilah shrieked. "I have a gun!" The man laughed. "So do I, sweetheart." A bigger one. He found the latch and threw the window open. He started to climb through, his rifle clutched in one hand. Delilah, trapped against the far wall, did what Wade had taught her. She raised the pistol with both hands. She pulled the hammer back. She aimed at the center of the man climbing through her window. And she pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening in the small cabin. The pistol bucked in her hands, slamming her back against the wall. The cabin filled with thick, sulphurous smoke. The man at the window made a noise, a sharp, wet grunt. He stopped climbing. He looked down at his chest, where a dark, spreading stain was blossoming on his duster. He looked up at her, his eyes wide with a terrible final surprise. He fell backward out of the window, disappearing from view. Delilah stood frozen, the heavy pistol still pointed. The silence that rushed in was more terrible than the gunshot. She was shaking, a violent, bone-deep tremor. She dropped the pistol. It clattered to the floor. She slid down the wall, put her face in her hands, and began to sob. Wade rode back. His horsel dared. He was bruised. His knuckles were split open and his chest ached where Croft's table had hit him. But he was alive. He was coming home. He whistled his signal as he entered the clearing. There was no answer. "Delilah!" he yelled. The door was still barred. He ran to it, pounding. "Delilah, it's me. Open the door." He heard a scraping sound and the bar was lifted. The door opened. She stood there, pale as a ghost, her face stray with tears and soot. The front of her dress was spattered with blood. Not her blood. WDE's heart stopped. He looked past her. The cabin was a wreck. The window was shattered. Glass was everywhere. There was a dark pool of blood on the floor just under the sill. He grabbed her, his hands frantic. "Are you hurt? Did he touch you? He came?" She whispered, her voice hollow. "The bounty man!" He broke the window. He was climbing in. WDE looked at her, then at the floor, then at the smoking pistol lying by the hearth. He pieced it together. He looked back at her. She was staring at her own hands, which were covered in powder burns. "I killed him, Wade. I shot him. He's outside." Wade pushed her gently aside and went to the broken window. He looked out. The bounty man was lying in the mud, his eyes open to the sky. He was dead. Wade turned. He looked at Delilah, who was shaking so hard she could barely stand. He looked at the shattered window, at the blood, at the gun. He saw what she'd been forced to do. He saw the violence he had brought to her. He saw the man she had become to survive, the strength that had held him up in the saloon, the rage that had fueled his ride. It all drained away. He had failed. He had left her. He had sworn to protect her. And he had left her to face this, the worst of it, alone. He crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. And Wade Coulter, who had not cried at the war, who had not cried at the fire, who had not cried in a decade of lonely, bitter nights, buried his face in her hair and broke. He sobbed. They were not quiet, restrained tears. They were deep, gasping, agonizing sobs that tore from his chest. He held her, his body shaking, and he wept for the man she had killed, for the woman in the fire, for the killer he was, and for the innocence he had just watched her lose. Delilah, shocked by his sudden raw grief, did the only thing she could. She held him back, she clutched his shirt, her own tears staining his chest, and she held the man who was breaking apart in her arms. "It's all right, Wade," she whispered, stroking his hair. "I'm here. You're home. We're safe." They stood in the middle of the ruined cabin for a long time, two broken people holding each other together. Later, when the tears were gone, a new cold clarity settled in. They had survived, but their pasts were not gone. They were lying in the mud outside the window and bleeding on the saloon floor in town. "We can't erase it," she said, her voice quiet. "No," he said, his voice. He looked at her. "But we can survive it together." He went outside. He dealt with the body of the bounty man, burying him in a deep grave in the trees, far from the cabin. Delilah cleaned the glass. She scrubbed the blood from the floor. When Wade returned, he was grim, but the despair was gone. He walked to the chest where he had placed her mended wedding dress. He took it out. He held it for a moment, then took it to the stove and fed it to the fire. She came and stood beside him. They watched the white fabric blacken, curl, and turn to ash. It was a funeral, it was a baptism. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, and the cut on his knuckles was bleeding again. "You're hurt," she said. "It's nothing." "Sit," she commanded, her voice gentle but firm. He said. She brought the basin of water and the rags. She fetched her sewing needle, not the heavy one he used for leather, but her own fine one. She cleaned his split knuckles. She stitched the gash on his shoulder, her movements precise, her touch light. He did not flinch. He just watched her face, memorizing it again. This new, stronger face. When she was done, she picked up the pistol from the floor. She held it, her hand steady now. "I don't want this," she said. He nodded. He took it from her. Together, they went outside to the new garden bed they had built. The soil was dark and rich. Abudii used his hands to dig a hole deep in the center of the bed. He placed the pistol in the hole. Delilah covered it, her hands pushing the soil back, burying the violence beneath the place where new life was meant to grow. They did not wait for the sun to set. They left within the hour. The cabin was a tomb, the grave in the woods was a secret, and the shattered window was a violation. It was no longer a sanctuary, it was a scar. Wade was ruthless in his packing. He took only what they needed to survive, not what they needed to be comfortable. Flour, salt, bacon, and coffee. The 2 heavy wool blankets and the quilts from the cot. His axe, his remaining ammunition, his whetstone, and his rifle. He loaded his horse steady until the animal's back was bowed. Delilah dressed in the new calico dress and the sturdy boots. She packed the fleece-lined coat. Though the day was warming, she took her needle and thread and the woolen shirt of his she had been mending. It was the only thing from her old life, the life in the cabin that she wanted to keep. She looked at the garden bed, the soil dark and rich, the pistol buried beneath it. "It will grow," Wade said from behind her. She nodded, though she knew they would never see it. He helped her mount the horse. There was no room for her to ride, so he would walk. He grabbed the reins, his face set. "We go north," he said, "into the high country. There's a valley I know, near the Gallatin Range. I helped map it for the railroad survey before they chose the southern pass. It's empty. Good water, good timber." "Is it far?" she asked. "Far enough." He did not look back. Delilah did. She watched the small log cabin, the place where she had been reborn, shrink until the pines swallowed it. She turned her face north and did not look back again. The first days were the hardest. They moved out of the foothills and onto the great open plains that rolled like a brown ocean toward the mountains. The sky was enormous, a vast pale blue that offered no shade and no comfort. Here there was nowhere to hide. Wade was relentless. He walked from before dawn until after dusk, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon behind them. He was looking for the dust cloud of riders. Delilah, perched on the horse, felt every muscle ache. Her guilt was heavy. He was walking while she rode. "I can walk," she offered on the second day. "You should ride." He shook his head, not slowing his pace. "Horses carrying supplies for two. And you're not healed." "Not really. You walk on this ground, your feet will open up again." He was protecting her, but his protection felt like a renewed debt. That night they made a cold camp, no fire. The risk of the smoke being seen was too great. They ate dry bacon and cold beans, huddled behind a low rise in the prairie, the wind pulling at the blankets. He took the first watch, sitting with a shotgun across his knees, a dark shape against the stars. Delilah lay wrapped in the quilts, pretending to sleep. She watched him. He had not truly spoken to her since they fled. The easy rhythm of the cabin was gone, replaced by the grim tension of the escape. Shek knew what he was seeing. He was seeing the man she had shot. He was seeing the blood on her dress. He was seeing the broken, violent thing she had become. The woman he had kissed. The woman who had made a choice was gone. In her place was a killer. The thought made her cold, colder than the wind. On the third night, Wade finally found a place he deemed safe enough for a fire. They were in a deep ravine, a dry creek bed carved into the plains, hidden from the open. The small fire of dried brush was a blessing. The heat seeped into her bones. He cooked rabbit he had snared, and the smell of the roasting meat was the first good thing she had known in days. They ate in their usual silence. The silence stretched to fill it to prove she was not the monster she felt herself to be. Delilah began to hum. It was an absent-minded sound, a melody that lived in her bones. It was the lullaby her mother had sung, a simple, sad tune from the old country. She hummed, staring into the small fire. Across from her, Wade froze. His hands, which were cleaning his knife, went still. He watched her, his face strange in the flickering light. Delilah stopped, embarrassed. "I'm sorry, it's just my mother used to sing it." "Don't stop," he said, his voice rough. She looked at him, surprised. She started again, her voice low, barely audible over the wind. She hummed the tune, and then, finding her courage, she sang the words. They were simple words about a lost boat in the moon. When she finished, the silence that returned was different. It was soft. "It's beautiful," he said. "She was the only one who sang," Delilah whispered. Elia hated it. He said it was frivolous. "He was a fool," Wade said. He looked down at the knife in his hands. "My mother used to sing before my father drank himself into the ground. I had forgotten what that sounded like. A woman singing." He looked up, his eyes dark and heavy with memory. "All I hear most nights," he murmured, "is screaming." She knew he meant the war. She knew he meant the woman in the fire. "The woman you lost," she said softly. "The one you told me about." He nodded, his jaw tight. He had never told her everything, only that he had tried to save someone once. He'd been a soldier. He had lit a fire, and he had failed. He drew in a deep breath. He owed her the truth of the man she had chosen. "She wasn't a girl," he said at last, his voice raw. "Not like that. She wasn't mine to lose. She was a settler's wife in Kansas, the one from the fire I told you about." "I know," Delilah whispered. "No," he said, his gaze sharp and haunted. "You don't. I didn't just fail to save her. I was the one. I lit the fire that trapped her." Delilah froze. "We were told they were traitors," he continued. "We were ordered to burn them out. I didn't think. I just did what I was told." He stared into the campfire, but his eyes were seeing another blaze, larger, crueler. "I saw her in the window holding her baby. I shouted for her to jump. I told her I'd catch her." He looked at Delilah then, his face carved with pain so deep it lived in his bones. "She didn't scream for help," he said. "She looked at me, and she cursed me. She called me butcher, devil. She looked at me with such hate, pure and justified. And she was right," his voice broke. "She turned away from me. She walked into the flames with her child. She chose to burn, to die, rather than take my hand. That's what I lost, Delilah. Not a woman, not love. I lost my soul. I saw what I was, a monster. And I've been hiding from that look in her eyes ever since. Delilah's heart ached. She moved closer, kneeling beside him, her knees pressing into the dirt. She didn't touch him at first. She was wrong, Wade, she whispered. He lifted his head, eyes wrecked. She was wrong, Delilah said again, her voice fierce. She was terrified. She didn't see the man. She saw the uniform, the fire. You followed orders the way I followed Elias. We both did what we had to survive. She died, he choked. And I lived, Delilah said gently. Because you were there. You're not the man she saw. You're the man who pulled me from the snow. The man who held me when I cried. You're not a monster, Wade. You're just a man. He stared at her clear, unflinching eyes. He saw no judgment there, no fear. Only understanding. He reached out, his rough, calloused hand trembling as he touched her cheek. And what are you, Delilah Rose? I'm the woman who killed a man to protect your home, she said, voice shaking but steady. I'm as stained as you are, Wade. We're the same. He looked at her, realizing he had always seen her as innocent, someone to protect, to redeem. He had never seen her as his equal. Then he leaned in and kissed her, a slow, shattering kiss of gratitude and equality. We need to rest, he murmured, pulling back. Tomorrow we reach the high country. That night, for the first time on the plains, he didn't lay their bedrolls apart. He spread them side by side. They'll build a cabin, he said into the darkness, gazing at the stars. No past names. No chains, Delilah smiled softly. A small one, she whispered, playing along. With a real garden bed. And a window facing the sun. No one will know them, Wade said, his voice fading softer. He'll hunt. She'll sing. Delilah slipped her hand into his. He laced his fingers through hers, and for the first time since her wedding night, she slept without dreaming. They traveled for 2 more days. The air thinned as they climbed, sharp and clean. The brown hills turned to grey spires of granite. They followed a narrow river into the mountain pass. On the 5th day, the sky bruised purple. The wind began to howl. A storm! Wade shouted over the roar. A bad one. We need to get off this ridge. He led the horse down the steep incline, shale sliding underfoot. The air turned bitter cold. Rain lashed them, icy and sharp. There, he shouted, pointing. A small rock overhang, barely a cave, offered a scrap of shelter. He pulled Delilah from the horse, tossing her the canvas. Hold this! The wind tore at the fabric. Rain turned to sleet. The storm struck like a beast, violent and merciless. Wade fought the tent, swearing as the wind ripped his words away. Finally, he got it staked down, a low wedge of canvas clinging to the rock. Inside! He roared. Delilah scrambled in, dragging the quilts behind her. He threw the supplies in after her, then dove inside, tying the flap shut against the storm. The world vanished. Only the shriek of wind and the hammer of sleet remained. Inside, the air was close and damp, the darkness complete. They were pressed together, shoulder to shoulder, knee to knee. Cold air seeped in, but their shared warmth fought it back. Delilah trembled. The storm's violence brought back the blizzard, the terror. She curled into herself. Wade, dripping and silent, wrapped an arm around her and pulled her close. He didn't speak. He just held her, offering his warmth. She leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. They sat that way for a long time, listening to the storm rage inches away. The tent, their fragile island in a world gone mad. He could feel her shaking. He could smell her, damp wool, smoke, and the faint, clean scent of her skin. He hadn't truly touched her since that night in the cabin. He'd been afraid of himself, of her, of what they'd become. But fear suddenly felt foolish. Delilah, he said softly. She looked up, barely able to see his outline in the dark. Only the gleam of his eyes. That night, he whispered, when we... He hesitated. I want you, he said, the words rough and honest. Every night. Like the first one. I want you safe. I want you always, but only if you want it too. He had given her the choice once. He was giving it again. Delilah felt warmth bloom through her chest. Not from the blankets, but from being wanted, not just needed. Desired, not claimed. She thought of that night. The pain, the tenderness, the hesitation. She pressed her face into his neck. "It still hurts," she whispered. "Just a little. I think I'm not built for it." He tensed, ready to pull away. "Delilah, I'm sorry. No," she said quickly, her hand on his chest. "You don't understand." She lifted her face to his. "It still hurts. But that's not what matters anymore." Her fingers traced the scar along his jaw. "It's what comes after that matters. When you hold me, when you kiss my scars, when I don't feel alone." Then she kissed him. "I want what comes after, Wade. I want you." He kissed her back, deep, slow, filled with the storm outside and the calm inside. He eased her down onto the bedrolls. Their movements were slow, deliberate, two survivors finding solace, not escape, not desperation. Peace. By dawn, the storm was gone. They emerged stiff and cold but whole. The sky was sharp blue, the world scrubbed clean. Before them the pass opened wide, a long green valley cradled by snow-capped mountains. A river wound through it like a silver thread. Pines, aspens, meadows, untouched, empty, perfect. "This is it," Delilah breathed. "This is it," Wade echoed. For the first time, the lines of pain around his eyes softened. He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "It's perfect," she said. They made their way down and found a flat meadow near the river, sheltered by tall cottonwoods. This will be the place. They set up camp, not for survival, but for life. Wade built a stone fire pit. Delilah tended the stew. They turned soil with the flat of the axe, shaping their first garden bed. They were rough, dirty, sunburned, but their eyes were clear. Wade stood by the largest cottonwood, carving something into its bark. Delilah came up behind him. "What are you doing?" He stepped aside. On the tree were two names, Wade, and below it Delilah. She stared at it. It wasn't a claim. It wasn't a mark of ownership. It was belonging. This was their place. Their life. Emotion surged in her chest, too strong to speak. She wrapped her arms around him from behind. Pressing her cheek against his back, he placed his hands over hers, holding them to his chest. "We survived," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Together. Thank you for listening to this story. We would love to hear your thoughts and where you are listening from. So please drop a comment. If you enjoyed this, be sure to subscribe to From Wild West.